This is the fifth video in the Men in Healing series and the second in the invisibility part. And remember from the first one on invisibility, we talked about a man's pain is taboo in our culture. Man's pain is taboo, and that means nobody wants to hear it, nobody wants to deal with it, nobody wants to see it or feel it. And so that really impacts a man's desire to keep things quiet, to keep his emotions under wraps and basically invisible. Today we're going to talk about the provide and protect role. A lot of people think the provide and protect role is a thing of the past, but actually I think it's alive and well, but it's just less visible. You can't see it very well, and it does impact the way a man deals with his emotions. We'll give some examples that'll make that more clear as we go along. But the first thing let's have a look at how men's and women's sex roles in the last 50 years have changed in the United States. Let's look at the female roles from the 1950s up to today. What we see is that in the 1950s, the female role was dominated by the traditional feminine. She was seen as a homemaker and a nurturer. As time went on, we see that the masculine was getting bigger. Women were encouraged to be assertive, aggressive, to compete in sports or in business, and when they did, they found encouragement with a "you go, girl." Most people were behind her, striving to get a better education, a better job, and to assert her independence. At present, her female symbol is only a little larger than her male symbol, since she is still also encouraged to be feminine. She's gotten true flexibility in her sex role, with both male and female roles available to her. If you have any doubts about women being blessed for taking on masculine roles, just look at this graph that shows women's participation in the workforce. In 1920, women were 20% of the workforce. Yes, women, unlike men, have always had some access to the opposite sex's sex role. 1 in 5 in the workforce were women in 1920. But look, as time goes on, it increases to 47% by 2010, nearly equal with men in the workforce. These shifts have been encouraged by both men and women in our culture, both saying, "You go, girl." But how about the men? In 1950, the men were dominated by a traditionally masculine role, provide and protect and seeking status. As time went on, his access to the feminine role got slightly larger, but he's never really been encouraged to take on that role. In fact, he still gets regularly shamed for moving in that direction. Think of what happens when men show interest in working with children. They're all too often expected to be potential abusers. He's not only discouraged from taking that role, people tend to fret that he may be a possible abuser. I know many men who are wonderfully gifted in working with kids who refrain from seeking that sort of work out of fear of false accusations. If men were encouraged to be nurturers, you'd think that they would be pushed to be stay-at-home dads, right? Well, just have a look at this census graph of stay-at-home dads in the United States. Notice that only a tiny percentage of stay-at-home parents were dads in both the 20th and 21st centuries. The number maintained at about 1% from 1994 to 2016. If the male role had been changing, you would expect to see a strong increase. No such increase is shown. In fact, in a survey in Great Britain, it was found that 0% thought dad should stay at home full-time with the kids. 0%. Dads are simply not seen as nurturers. Couple that to our cultural distaste for the emotions of men, and it seems pretty clear that men are still locked out of the feminine role. Still not convinced? Listen to this story. A young couple is going to meet the woman's parents for the first time. Everything's going great. People are getting along with pleasantries being exchanged, and then the mother asks the young man what he plans to do with his life. He says, "Well, what I really want to do is be a stay-at-home dad with the kids." What would the parents' reaction be? I think you know what it'd be. "You're not going to support our daughter? Rumph!" Can you feel how men are locked into the provide and protect role and excluded from the feminine? But something else is occurring between 1970 and the present. Notice the male symbol actually got smaller as time went on. Not only were men discouraged from the feminine role, they're now discouraged from the masculine role. This happened and continues to happen through regular male bashing, media, and political misandry, and a general disdain for the masculine in men. This has put men in a tight spot. Now, not only are they excluded from the feminine roles, they're shamed for being masculine. If they seem too masculine, they get shamed. If they seem too feminine, they get shamed. A very tough spot, especially for young boys, who must be confused about whether they want to grow up to be men, given the overt hatred expressed towards men and masculinity. This is a far cry from the flexibility we've already seen that's given to women. Even with the limited roles and the misandry and shaming, men are still expected to provide and protect. Think of this example. You and your spouse are awakened in the middle of the night by a huge noise from downstairs. You both are startled and look into each other's eyes. Who's gonna go? Duh. Likely the man will be the one. But think about the woman. If she stepped up and said, I'll go, she'd be a hero. And if she said, honey, can you go and check that out? She'd be okay, right? She has flexibility in roles. But how about the guy? Well, if he went and checked it out, he would not be a hero. He'd be doing what was expected. But if he said, honey, can you go and check that out? What would happen? He'd be shamed, seen as a wimp and incompetent. He would pay a severe price. His roles are set in stone, and he has very little flexibility. He either protects or he's shamed. So men are locked into a nebulous role, with the only one sure thing being he needs to appear to provide and protect and not complain. I know a young man who graduated from college and couldn't find a job. He went to work for Costco as a night shift stocker. This young man was in good shape. He could bench 225 multiple times. He described his nights as being exhausting. He said he and the other men, some of whom were considerably older, lifted 40-plus pound boxes all night with very little break. By the morning, he was exhausted. He told me that the females working the same job only lifted tissue boxes one at a time, or they pushed a broom. They made the same salary, but one was doing tough masculine work and the other was not. What would have happened if he had complained? I think we all know. I call this the muscle gap. He's locked into doing much harder work simply because of his sex. I learned a hard lesson about the connection of the provide and protect role with men in intentionally limiting their public emotion. In the 1980s, when I worked with families who had experienced the death of one of their children, I'd meet with the entire family and encourage the kids to talk about their emotional reactions and encourage the moms, and then would encourage the dad. Like a dope, I thought that everyone needed to have a chance to speak and emote. When I would get to the dad, he would say, well, not this time. I'd encourage him, and after a while he would say, okay, and he'd start opening up about what was happening to him emotionally. Immediately, I noticed what the kids and the mom would get uncomfortable and fidgety. Their angst went up quickly and noticeably. After making this mistake repeatedly, I realized what was going on. The children and even the mom were dependent on the dad to make things safe and contain the space. If he showed vulnerability, then their safety was at risk. He knew this intuitively and had always avoided opening up in order to make things safe for his kids and his wife. Making his emotional pain invisible was being of service to his wife and his kids. He did this without thinking, and his previous silence was never noticed or appreciated. The provide and protect role was playing a huge part in his silence and caring for his family. It seems clear that men are still harnessed by the provide and protect role, even when most men think they aren't. What is the price men pay for this rigid role? The price they pay is that they're expected to maintain independence at all times. The young man moving boxes was expected not to say a word. The man awakened in the middle of the night was forced to appear independent. The father wanted to appear strong in order to care for his family. This is the default in our culture. Men, if they want to be thought of as men, will need to appear independent all the time. And this brings us to why men's emotional pain is invisible. Any open emoting shows dependence. Women are allowed this, men are not. So our culture sees a man's emotional pain as taboo and will avoid it whenever possible. And now we see that our culture expects men to maintain the appearance of independence at all times. In order to do this, well, he must not let others see that he's dependent. In other words, he can't let people see he's vulnerable. Dependency and vulnerability are a no-no, and they're just what is demanded of someone openly emoting. Men are generally forbidden dependency and vulnerability, and these things are instrumental in making one's emotions known publicly. Okay, so we've gone through the first two reasons that men's emotional pain is invisible in our culture. The men's pain is taboo was the first one, and now today we talked about the provide and protect. The next up is going to be the male hierarchy and how that impacts male emotions. And if you want to skip ahead and see all these videos, you can go to the Patreon site, and for $2 a month, you can see the videos that I did 5 years ago in that online class that basically I'm now reproducing as we go along. It's just $2 a month. And just sign up for $2 per video and tell Patreon you only want to spend $2 maximum a month. And then for $2, you can see the whole thing. So come on and check it out, see what you think. And we'll be talking about the male hierarchy and how that impacts things. And after that, we're going to talk about all of the biological stuff that impacts it, especially testosterone. So we'll look forward to seeing you. And let's not forget, men are good. And if you're a man, you are too, boss. So you take good care. And like, comment, subscribe, and all that stuff.